Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Recollection, Sept, a Grand Archive TCG podcast, part of the Maindeck podcast family. I'm Dan.
And I'm Taylor. Welcome back, everybody, to the Recollection, Sept. Before we get into anything this week, first, I want to shout out friends of the podcast over at the Banish Zone in Pennsylvania, specifically Warnersville, Pennsylvania. They are holding a regional for Grand Archive on September 21st. That's a Saturday. And they would very much appreciate it if anybody in the area, or even not in the area, would attend. So I'm just diving right into it. It's
We're just going.
I'm very excited about the whole thing. I wish I could go. Unfortunately, I can't. But
yeah, they're a little far away from us.
Yep.
Unfortunately, we had so Taylor. We had David Weinstein from the Banish Zone. He's a TO there.
Yep.
He organizes Grand Archive events, and he was on our podcast. He was on Recollection, Sept last year to discuss the last regional they got to run. Last year, was it? I don't even know anymore. Was it this year or last year?
It was this year. It was like shortly after Chemical Revolution released, I thought.
It was just during the ALC season.
Yeah.
Time. Mm-hmm. I don't know what's going on. But
Dan, what year is it?
Yeah, I'm not actually even sure. Honestly, I couldn't tell you.
It's 2024.
Oh, thanks.
You're welcome.
So they've got a regional that they're putting together, which is really cool. We would love a regional in our area, but there's none up here.
Maybe someday.
Someday there will be.
Just hint to anybody listening, maybe.
So I'm saying that if you are fortunate enough to be anywhere within driving distance at a minimum of this regional, which is on Saturday, September 21st, registration starts at 10:30 a.m., you got to go to this thing. Taylor, why do they have to go to this regional event?
They have to go because the prizes are spectacular. I mean, beyond just playing one of the best games out there right now, the prizes are amazing. So first of all, you get a very cool Mercurial Heart Sapphire event pack, which contains potentially foils. Actually, no, it's guaranteed foil of one of the cards from one of the Recollection decks, either the Sylvia or the Tristan one. So some sweet stuff there. Just already, those are like really highly sought after foils. They're very cool.
The Spirit of Slime foil is over $500 is what it sells for.
Oh, absolutely. Like the first one that confirmed sold on eBay sold for like $2,000 or $3,000, which was absolutely bonkers. I mean, they won't sell for that anymore, but they will still sell for a very pretty penny.
Yeah.
So what a participation prize that would be. You don't even have to win a match, and you can get one of these event packs, and it could be a Spirit of Slime. On top of this, now if you top if you top cut the regional, I don't know exactly what the cut's going to be, but you'll get a North American Nationals qualifier card worth 3 points, that you can use to redeem for entry to the North American Nationals. You'll get back your entry card and also a very cool CSR version of it as well, a collector rare version. And this card is Lightweaver's Assault. So if you are a Luxem fan, get over there. Even if you're not a Luxem fan, it's just dope art. And obviously, like, we all want to go to Nats. Nats is really cool. Nationals is a lot of fun to participate in. You gotta get your points. So go and pick up one of these. And finally, the coolest part of all of this, well, actually, I really like the event packs, actually. I think that's cooler. But what other people will probably say is the coolest part of all of this is that there's $2,000 in prizing on the line.
Yeah, and that's not a standard thing in regionals.
Nope.
And I really want to specifically point that out. So David did approach us and asked if we wanted to mention the regional again, which is why you guys are getting a little bit of a commercial to begin the podcast. So apologies for that. But like Taylor said, David is a friend of ours. He runs the community over there for some other Maindeck team members, and it's a we kind of want to help them out. Just let people know about this, because if Pennsylvania, there's a lot of populace around this area. It's not that hard to get a little bit more outreach, to get to some more places. Maybe you haven't heard that they have this regional, or you were on the fence about it. But the fact that they are putting up 2K in prizing on their own for this event is extremely cool.
Mm-hmm.
In addition to that, they've got raffles. They've got DOA first ed booster box raffle, bunch of playmats, deck boxes, sleeves, posters, etc. The big thing they're trying to do with this event is they're trying to break 64 players. Okay, because if they can break 64 players, that will unlock a lot more for them in the future, being able to run bigger events with bigger cuts, and things can get a lot cooler, right? So, and you mentioned the coolest thing was you mentioned a few things that are the coolest thing. One of the things I think is extremely cool about this is they have a guest artist as well.
Hold up, they have a guest artist at this regional? That's insane.
Now, this is a little unique. So this guest artist isn't someone who has done artwork for Grand Archive specifically, like not for the official cards, but a lot of people do know this guest artist because her name is Lucky Yuki, and she does artwork for like fan art for games, but she actually has a Patreon where she prints off these tokens and everything, and proxies basically, and sends them out to people. Taylor and I both also happen to be patrons.
I have
there we go.
A very cool Power Cell token that I received just this week, actually. Just, I think it was Tuesday, came in the mail.
Yeah. So for the video podcast watchers, Taylor held it up and you could see the gold foiling that's on it as well. They're really, really nice. They're super, super cool. So Lucky Yuki is awesome. Really excited that they have her there at the event to be able to potentially sell art, sell more tokens, potentially draw something for you. I don't know. I can't speak for her, but like that's that's super cool. Side events and everything too all day. So even if you scrub out, you can go play win a box side events and everything. I mean, they put on good events there, and this is another one where it's stacked to the brim. There's no reason basically why this shouldn't be a total success. So shout out to them. Definitely go check them out. Again, that's Saturday, September 21st. Registration's at 10:30 a.m. First round starts at 11. So make sure to get there a little early. Get yourself set up. Get your Omnidex list submitted. All the good stuff. It would be. I wish I could go. It would be a total blast.
Yeah, same here. If we were, I was gonna say like even a little bit closer, but it would actually have to be like significantly closer.
It'd be pretty close. pretty. But although I think it'd be fun if at some point we could make things work, Taylor, to just take a trip out there for an event because because we know the team over there. So
yeah,
we'll have to figure that out.
We could do a Banish Zone regional one weekend, and then if we're lucky, there's another East Coast regional the weekend before or after.
Ooh,
dip. Just really kind of go hit up the East Coast and see all the Grand Archive players out there, because like there's just a ton out there actually. Like there's a bunch in Virginia, in this Pennsylvania area, in Massachusetts. They've had like a 6 or 7 regionals out that way. That's maybe an overestimation. I haven't done an exact count, but they've had a lot of regionals out there already this season. And so it's awesome to see all this concentration of players available, able to make these tournaments fun and successful events.
Can you imagine like just the main deck team moving from Airbnb to Airbnb, just like tearing up the East Coast for a week or two this season?
Actually, so I can't imagine that, because that'd be dope as hell. I've been trying to justify ways to make this happen, so don't tempt me with a good time.
That'd be sick. Hit some LGSs up for like some local events in between or whatever. Just like suddenly, like there's a local event at some random store that's got like 4 to 6 players, and suddenly it's doubled because the entire main deck team just descends on some like random Thursday night to play.
Yes, exactly.
That'd be so sick.
That'd be awesome. But so again, thanks for letting us know about this, David. We're happy to shout you guys out. Excellent store over there. So Now, Danny, how has your week been?
My week has been good. I've been feeling a little bit more. I mean, I've been feeling better health wise, which has been the big thing. When we last recorded a podcast,
You were like
I,
on your deathbed.
I was barely alive,
Yeah.
but we had to talk about
We had to
a
sell
set in Chicago.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I was really happy to have Mitch there because I could let you guys talk for a bunch of it instead. Even though I still managed to get in like a monologue at some point.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be a podcast without Dan monologuing.
that's unfortunately true. But yeah, it's been good. I'm feeling a lot better now. I actually have managed to put out a few videos. I'm recording some more, so that's good. We're kind of getting back into the swing of things a little bit. And we'll have some exciting Grand Archive stuff coming soon. I think the big thing for me, Grand Archive wise, has been exciting this week. We've been getting the Mortal Ambition spoilers kicking off a little bit. In fact, Silidar gave us an exclusive one. Not for right now. You guys, I'm sorry. No, that'd be so cool. A surprise.
Wow.
No. I meant for the live stream I did earlier this week.
Yes.
The live stream we did, we had a really cool exclusive spoiler. I don't know. Do you want to talk about that really quick for a sec? We'll just pop it on the screen here.
Yes, please do that.
Okay.
Can you remind me exactly what the effects are? Because it was dope as heck. It was a fire weapon that seems like absolutely bonkers.
So it wasn't a weapon. That was the interesting thing. It was.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. We have Fang of Dragon's Breath was the spoiler that we got to spoil on the supporter pack opening live stream that I ran earlier this week. This is a fire 1-cost Fantasia warrior spell with polearm weapon link, which is just wild. So you're going to basically link this, or enchant, if you want to use a magic term, enchant your polearm with this. The linked weapon gets +2 power, and it has Jin bonus. Linked object has rest, remove a durability counter from this object, deal 2 damage to target unit. So this is really neat. It obviously is like the comparison that I think you were making there, Taylor, was that during the live stream was this is 1 cost for 4 damage, more or less, requiring a weapon in play. This is eerily similar to the ultimate result of Blazing Throw.
Well, even on top of that, it just works incredibly well with Blazing Throw. Because you have to have the weapon in play anyway. As long as you have enough durability on it, you're dealing just a huge amount of damage in one turn for a very low number of reserve. It requires some setup, obviously, but not really that much setup.
Ideally, we would have a weapon with 3 durability, right? Allow you to attack with it, then remove a durability, and then have it still be alive to Blazing Throw afterwards.
Oh, you know what? If I remember, there was a fire weapon warrior pole arm that was spoiled.
Oh, really?
At Chicago, with 3 durability. So it appears we have already met one of these great criteria.
Yeah, let's just throw this up here too for everyone. So this is Dragon's Dawn, and you're looking at an absolutely gorgeous CSR of it.
Yeah.
This is a 1 cost. Now that is a materialization cost, not a reserve cost. So you're gonna have to actually lose a card or a floating memory to pay for this.
The technical term.
Memory cost. Yeah. I was trying to make it simple, but you're right. It's a 2 power and 3 durability weapon with. As an additional cost to materialize this card, you have to banish 3 fire element cards from your graveyard. So go back to our fire element discussion podcast. You see, that's the whole thing. That's the theme. But as class bonus on attack, you may discard a fire element card and have Dragon's Dawn deal 2 unpreventable damage to your champion. If you do, this attack gets +2 power and gains on champion hit, draw a card. So this thing's pretty wild. It's got costs everywhere, right? You have to pay the memory cost. You have to banish 3 fire element cards. You have to, on attack, you have to discard a fire element card and take 2 unpreventable damage. The return is it is going to be a 4 damage swing that then draws a card back in your hand. And obviously in fire, pitching cards we can make pretty favorable for us. Is kind of the game plan. But now you can also enchant this with Fang of Dragon's Breath. So now you're looking at a 6 damage attack that then afterwards you can still rest it to deal 2 more damage. And then you can still Blazing Throw it. Taylor, are there any other warrior cards, warrior attacks in Fire that come to mind when you think about a 6 damage weapon on its own?
Man, I don't know. I mean, there's one that is pretty dope with fire cards in the graveyard, Fiery Momentum, but that can't be what you're talking about because that's not, that you're going to eat up those cards playing the Dragon's Dawn. It's
Yeah,
got to
yeah.
be something else. What could it be, Dan?
Maybe what if you combined all of this? Now are you always going to get this together? I'm not sure. But if you Rending Flames with a Fang of Dragon's Breath to Dragon's Dawn, Rending Flames, of course, 3-cost attack, has on a 3 damage and on attack banish 3 fire element cards. If you do, you double the attack's damage before it's dealt. So this is going to be 6 plus 3, so 2 from 2 base, 2 from the on attack, 2 from the weapon link. That's 6 plus 3 from the Rending Flames. That's 9. That doubles to 18. And then you rest it to deal the 2 damage afterwards to 20. And then if you have that Blazing Throw, Taylor, 24.
24
Can
damage.
you find a single point of damage anywhere? You've already killed half the champions in the game at level 3.
2/3 of the champions, even.
2/3 of the. Thank you. Yeah. Fire Djinn. Yeah, I mean, like I said, there are a bunch of costs. You're going to do that. You have to have 6 fire element cards in your graveyard. That's
a lot. You have to have 7 cards in hand as well. After paying for Dragon's Dawn.
I want to back up 5 cards. Because you can stack the on attack on Dragon's Dawn so that you pitch the fire element card first.
Hold up, wait.
Rending Flames is also an on attack.
Oh yeah, you discard a fire element card.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Yep.
Yeah. So if you just actually have to have 5 in your graveyard.
5 in your graveyard.
Then you do the attack, pitch the fire element card to get the effect. That can bring you to the 3rd one required to then banish for the Rending Flames.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, if your opponent ever goes like shields down against you, it's just game over. Like you thought erupting was bad. This is gonna sneak some wins in for sure.
I'm definitely excited to see what other Djinn nonsense exists. Djinn has been very weapon focused, which has been kind of cool to see. Like, I mean, I think that's a really good identity for Warrior to have. I kind of wonder if in the future, when the game's gone on longer, we've really honed in on identities, we'll be like, it's kind of silly that all the ally decks were Warrior based, because maybe Warrior's like really going to hone in on this. Like, no, it's all about playing and using weapons. And Guardian really feels like it should be more of the class that's like playing the ally decks. But we didn't have as many cards, so.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, that's how the early sets go, right? You gotta sit there and kind of figure out your identity for a lot of this stuff. And you really see that too with like, talking about like wind and water and fire and all these elements that we've been kind of going over. There's some cards that are just kind of like from Dawn of Ashes that are very powerful. And they kind of do a lot of different things, or they're maybe a little bit more generic than maybe what you would expect to see out of like a basic element card. And that's a lot of it is just like, there's a lot of experimentation that goes into these first sets and trying to figure out, what the design should be and how to group these effects such that, they're contributing to how one element feels and maybe still able to like play with another element or, give some like secondary effects or something to another element. And you just like it just takes a lot of like kind of trial and error to figure out where a lot of these go. And you're not gonna get it in the first set. And you're probably not gonna get it in the second set or the third set. Like it takes a while for a lot of these to really kind of like kind of sit down and figure out where they need to be. Like if you look at like Magic the Gathering, right? Like that card game's been around for 30 years and they're still like playing around with like the color pie, which is how they define where these, which colors each which effects each color gets. And it still it's for the most part fairly solid, but it still like kind of moves around every once in a while. And you see shifts over time where they'll move one effect out of one color and into another. Decide like it flavorfully works more sense there thematically, or just plays better. For gameplay reasons, they might need to move some stuff over. So I would expect that we'll see a lot of like some more experimentation and work to like hone in on a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, a TCG is when you're designing a TCG, the people designing this have a pretty unenviable task where they have to not only like create clear signposted, meaning that like you're sort of guided in a particular direction when you're building a deck. Like they have to create these archetypes, right? That like so people can really hone in and figure out what works for them. And those have to be like not too obvious, but obvious enough that people will start to notice them. So you have to be able to look at these and go, yeah, like Jin likes pole arms. I'm going to figure out how to build a pole arm deck or whatever, right? But you're trying to do that without making it so that there's exactly one good deck, for each archetype. Because then you lose the whole customizable element. Like they might as well just sell you the deck in a box and pick your favorite, call it a day. And that's a fine line that you walk there to try and figure that out. And yeah, it's like it's iterative for sure. It doesn't you don't have it locked down ever, honestly. Just it's never really completely figured out.
Yep. And if it is, like, your game is probably too simple. Like, it just means that there isn't enough complexity and depth to it to really let a lot of these players express themselves in the way they want to in a trading card game.
Yeah, I agree with that totally. Little TCG design crash course for the indie designers out there. But speaking of complexity and depth, today we're going to be talking about what's going to be our main topic here, Taylor.
Yeah, so we're gonna finish up our basic element series here, and we're gonna talk about wind today, and kind of wind and how it works, and the philosophies behind it, and how it wants to like guide you and signpost you as you are kind of experimenting with wind decks on your own. So we've talked about fire, we've talked about water. We had to take a break to talk about Since Chicago, obviously, because it was so exciting. But now we're back. So
we kind of talked about fire and water, and then we took a break to talk about slimes. And now we're going to wind.
Slimes is not a basic element. It's not part of the series.
Though, I mean, it's not a basic element, but it does have a spirit.
It is a spirit. It is a spirit.
Now, before we get to our main discussion, I'm just going to really quickly do one more shout out. I don't want you to feel like you've been watching ads all day so far, but I do want to mention again, if you appreciate the Recollection step, you appreciate the Main Deck family of podcasts, all the things that support us are really, really appreciated. Liking the video, leaving a comment, 5-star reviews on Spotify or iTunes, all that kind of stuff is really great. Thank you so much for all of that. And if you're shopping for Grand Archive cards, you want to get some singles, go to tcgplayer.com, but use our affiliate link instead of just going to tcgplayer.com. Go to bit.ly/shoptcgs. That's bit.ly/shoptcgs. That is how you can shop for TCGs and also support us at the same time. So thank you so much for your support.
All right. Well, yeah, we'll hop into it then. So wind is really cool. Lots of people like wind. I'm one of them. I like all the basic elements, actually. They're all really cool.
Lots of people are kind of annoyed by wind too, though.
That's fair. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of been a boogeyman for a while with wind allies being just such a staple deck for most of the game's life. I think, especially like Wind Crux too. Like at the very beginning of the Dawn of Ashes season, like was just a dominant deck. And a lot of that was due to Crux, but also just to the strength and kind of universality of the wind cards. But so like fire is kind of all about burning through its resources quickly, trying to end the game fast, and just making sure it's either going to win quickly or lose quickly. Water is going to sit there and grind you down and be a very controlling element. Wind is kind of in the middle. Not necessarily. It's an interesting element because it can kind of play both control-y and aggressive decks or play styles depending on how you build your deck. Because a lot of what it's trying to do is just really like kind of control the board. It is trying to put itself in the position to win the game in the next couple of turns, and it's always kind of like jockeying for that, trying to figure out what it can do to kind of get rid of your defenses or put up more defenses as what's needed. So a lot of it is just really kind of, I hate the term mid range because it doesn't, to me, it doesn't describe anything in terms of TCGs. Like when I talk about like an aggressive deck, I'm it's easy to say and describe that it's just trying to like end the game quickly. It's trying to put a lot of pressure on the opponent and say you have to answer this or you'll lose. Control decks are like very often described as like a lockdown deck, or just a deck that's trying to stop your opponent from doing things such that it can enact its own game plan later on in the game. Whereas like mid range is kind of a weird balance between the two almost, where it's trying to like accumulate some value by like 2-for-1ing your opponent. It's also trying to like apply some pressure so that your opponent just doesn't get to do what they want to do for free, without any sort of like headaches. And it also like kind of controls the board a little bit because it's, if you don't, like, you're just not going to have the time to enact your own game plan anyway. So wind is kind of like this weird amalgamation of all these different concepts, I would say.
I think the way I think about this, and just let me know if you agree or disagree, but I think fire is trying to be the problem in any match. Like fire should be presenting the issue to be solved. You don't solve it, you lose, right? And water is trying to present the solution in any match. It's going to say, well, whatever you're doing, I'm just going to try to put a stop to that, and then eventually I'll win someday. And wind is really, I feels like more often going to be not, it doesn't clearly decide which one it wants at the start of the game. It's really just trying to be the interaction or the reaction. It's trying to go, I can be a problem if you let me. I can be a solution if you need me to. And the cost of that is usually, it's fairly specific as to the situation where either one really works. It's never going to be as fast as, well, I won't say never, but it's in the most optimized form, it's not as fast as fire at being a problem. And in the most optimized form, it is not as hard to stop as water is at controlling the game on the whole. But it tries to simply maneuver itself into the right position where it will kind of blunt everything and win, or it goes, well, you're going too slow and I'm faster than you.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I agree completely with that summation. It very much kind of like toes that line between whether it is going to demand an answer from you or whether it is going to demand a better question, right? So, a lot of what you see with wind, especially, is it just it plays to the board a lot as well, in comparison to other elements, where fire is kind of going at your face right off the bat and just trying to attack your life total. Wind and water is not just attacking your life total, but they're attacking kind of your resources on all fronts, whether that be your memory or your graveyard or your hand or what have you. Wind is very field focused. Like a lot of its effects require that it targets things that are already on the field, be that allies or Fantasia or weapons, items, regalia. Like it usually isn't picking things up out of memory and getting rid of them, or like discarding your hand, or really doing too much to your graveyard. Like there's a few small effects that kind of bleed over into those, but for the most part, it's trying to control what your opponent is playing to the field. And really, that, I think that makes a lot of sense too, because like that's really where a lot of the main focus of the game is anyway. Like a lot of the interaction is happening on the field, either through allies attacking your opponent or their allies, or you're like having a weapon that attacks. Like basically everything has to go through the field in order to actually do damage to your opponent and reduce their life total to 0, so that you actually win the game. So it makes sense that it spends a lot of time and a lot of like design consideration there as well. So one of the big things with wind is obviously allies, right? And it's not just allies; it's also like buffing up your allies and making them better. This is probably like when I think of wind, like the biggest thing I think of. And a lot of that is due to the success and ubiquity of wind allies throughout Grand Archive's life, that deck archetype. But a lot of it too is just there's a lot of really powerful cards in the game that in wind that deal with either making your board more powerful or letting you get more value out of your board. So cards like, a big easy one to think about is like you have a board full of allies and you play a tune with the winds, which is a wind spell. It might just be an action or a skill. I don't know if it doesn't matter. It's a wind card, a wind action that adds a buff counter to every ally on your field. So it just makes your team bigger than your opponents. And so actually, this is a really good example of how you kind of play both sides of that. Like, am I presenting a problem or am I giving a solution, right? Not only are you creating these allies that are going to hit harder and do more damage to your opponent, but they're also just like better able to control the board as well, since they can just attack whatever ally they want to. So to me, this is like kind of one of the more prolific wind cards.
Yeah, and I mean, just speaking of like how Wind's allies operate compared to the other factions, the other elements. Excuse me.
Been playing too much lately.
Yeah, a lot of different card games. Fire's allies are very much focused on the power stat, like largely. You're going to be looking at some of the more prominent fire allies are going to be things like 3/1s, 2/1s, 4/1s, even 4/2s, that kind of stuff. Water instead is the opposite. Most of their allies have big old butts. They're big booty buddies, and they're going to be they're going to have taunt, and they're going to sit there and they're going to have intercept, and they're just kind of control things. Wind stats are often a little more even across the board. In Grand Archive, due to the way stats work, actually, typically more playable allies have slightly more health than power. That tends to be the case. 2/3 is our stat line for a basic ally, not a 2/2, and that's largely due to the attacking advantage, everything having the ability to attack right away. That's probably a whole other podcast episode we could talk about, which would be kind of interesting. But for now, wind is still usually the two numbers are closer to each other a lot of the time, and ability wise, they're again kind of a blend. There aren't too many taunt allies. It's usually more class dependent if they're going to have taunt in wind, but you've got interceptors and you've got more aggressively slanted allies that you want to attack with. It's just a little more. I'm kind of glad we did win last because fire and water present two more extremes, and wind it's going to just bridge that gap somewhere in the middle. It's often based on what class the card is bonus towards, really.
Yeah, I mean, wind is just such a flexible like element. Like water, I say water has like a lot of agility in that it has a bunch of different answers to kind of tailor its game plan to what your opponent is doing and stop it. Whereas wind just like kind of like flows a little bit more, where it doesn't have as like specific or sharp answers that it can turn into, but it does have a lot of like general things you can play with that will like you can use to give you an advantage, but it's not necessarily going to like win the game on its own. You have to kind of combine a lot of these effects together in order to get to the point where you're actually taking control of the game. Whereas like water has like mind freeze, right, which just banishes level cards from your opponent's memory for a turn, which can really just like completely decimate some decks. Like it just completely takes them out of the game. Wind doesn't have anything like that. Like you have to spend quite a few more resources to just really take someone out of the game like that. It's usually you're kind of grinding over a few turns with your opponent and trying to figure out exactly what cards you need to play wind to kind of get these small advantages. Specifically, like a lot of these 2-3 allies, it's kind of the baseline, right? Like a lot of it is trying to figure out how you can kind of take advantage of what your opponent is doing and use a couple 2-3 allies to maybe do the same thing as like a a larger 3-4 or 4-5 you might see in another element.
And I mean, I think just that idea of buff counters and how flexible they can be and how they can be applied, on top of your allies to make you better and everything. I mean, buff counters are just they're a huge theme in Wind in general. I think Wind has the lion's share of buff counters. Again, class dependent a little bit, but compared to other elements for sure, at least.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, we have from Mercurial Heart, we have both Spirited Falconer and Andronica, which add their class bonus to Tamer and Warrior, respectively. But they'll add buff counters to other units you have. Grim Slime, another Tamer unit that has come into the limelight again with the Sylvie Recollection deck that comes in with buff counters and then can transfer them to other allies, right? So you see a lot of that where Wind can kind of manage its resources and make certain allies bigger when they need to be, and just kind of like have a large army that is greater than the sum of its parts, right? Yeah, it's using those buff counters really effectively to both play offense and defense.
And Wind also, in maybe more of a thematic slant, but related to how the allies work, it has effects that the other elements don't necessarily, that involve waking your allies up or even waking your champion up sometimes, to be able to just take it. Like it's thematic in that it feels like, you get a second wind, right? And then you get to go. That's literally the name of a card in the game, to be able to attack again. But it works really well mechanically with this identity of, we're going to actually just pump into our allies extra abilities. Vigor, I should have mentioned that right away. Vigor is a wind themed ability for sure. Like that's got I think it's got the most wind allies that have the vigor ability compared to other elements. Which just allows you to wake up at the end of the turn. So that all ties together really nicely and just kind of really cements Wind as like the Wind is the element that should have the better board state in any given sort of matchup out of the two.
Yep. Yeah, it has all these tools to like really just kind of take control of the board that you don't see as much in other elements. Like Wind it like plays well with combat as well. It doesn't necessarily control combat like water does, but it has a lot of effects that can turn combat in your favor. So water has Song of Frost that just straight up ends combat, right? Like usually you'll use that to save an ally. Or oftentimes I should say you'll use it to save an ally after it's been attacked. Like if you've got a 2/3 and your opponent has 2/2/3s, they swing 1/2/3 into your ally, they swing the other one in. You play Song of Frost to end the second attack, and now all of a sudden you still have your ally, they still have their two allies, and you're kind of at parity almost. And you get to your turn and figure out how to deal with their board. In Wind has a bunch of ways to do the same, what is effectively the same thing. So they have, let's see, they've got Favorable Winds, which is just like a 1-cost fast spell that gives all your allies +1 health, right? So in the example of 2/2/3s and 1/2/3, that doesn't quite add up to actually being a winning trade for you. But if they have a 2/3 and a 1/1 or a 2/3 and a 1/2, now all of a sudden, like, that's a much better deal for you. Like your Favorable Winds just saves your ally. Wind also has like a lot of cards that just kind of bounce what it removes your ally from play and you will put it back somewhere, put it somewhere you can use. Like a very notable one is Reclaim, because it has floating memory where you'll pay 2 and return your ally to your hand. So while you don't get to keep your ally on the board, it is effectively like saving your ally and saving you that resource for you to play again later, while also wasting your opponent's time by taking the time to attack into that ally and having it go nowhere, right? So Wind just has a lot of effects like that as well, which help kind of turn the tide of combat without actually really ending combat or anything like that.
Yeah, I feel like water is more of attempting to just escape or delay the problem for a little bit, whereas wind has more situations where it can just resolve that conflict in a way that is favorable for you immediately, from doing something like Zephyring. I mean, I've been playing some wind. Sylvie. So Zephyring the green slime to put the counters onto the other thing, and then just retaliating and killing the whatever they were attacking.
Yep.
That's a very like wind trick, or Slime's Blessing for the slime players. The other one where it's like, yeah. I mean, you thought you were going to get somewhere, but actually now it's bigger, and or Slime Shield it too, right? Yep. Wind slime cards are so good.
Yeah, the wind slime cards are bonkers.
Every slime card is.
Yeah, unfortunately. But yeah, so like wind just has a lot of ways to kind of like turn the tides of combat without actually, getting into the weird technical details of it, the semantics of it all. On top of that too, that kind of like leads into like one of the other things that wind does really well, which is I call it bounce, which is a term I borrow from a lot of other card games where you either return an ally or some other object to your opponent's hand, or you will, like in this case, actually just suppress it, which is exiling it until the end of turn, or banishing it until the end of turn, excuse me. So wind just has a lot of effects like that as well, that you can play with. And wind gets to do a lot of really cool things with these, actually. Like these suppress and bounce effects just work really, really well with the wind cards, because you've got, we mentioned a couple cards earlier that on enter will add buff counters to allies. So you can replay those allies and add even more buff counters to your board. You can, again, save your allies from damage. You can, in the case of Zephyr, you can suppress your own green slime and make your stuff bigger, or you can suppress your opponent's things to remove a problem for some amount of time. So again, just a lot of cards that really like help you kind of, figure out how to play the game, like figure out whether I should say allow you to either present an answer or present an answer or ask a question of your opponent. There's just a lot of really flexible effects. You also have Dream Fairy, which is pretty prolific at this point, which is a 3-cost 1/2 ally, which on enter will return an opponent's ally to their memory, and then they can't play that cards with that ally's name until Dream Fairy is removed from the field. So just a lot of ways to kind of like move cards from one zone to another.
I think the bounce aspect is one of the biggest signposts to me for what wind is trying to do, where you in water, you Song of Frost that attack, okay, the attack's gone, it's done. You frostbind something, okay, the card is negated, it's gone. Wind and in fire, you just will deal damage to stuff, right? Kill it, right? Wind has no or very few ways, it's not really part of their exact pie to be able to just remove the problem, just be like, that's gone, it's not here anymore, it's gone. All of their interaction is usually tempo based. It's saying that is not here right now, that is going to be gone for a turn, that is gone, but if you deal with this, you can play it later again. And that, I mean, that really is showing you the importance, I think, of this element, how this element plays in relation to the time scale of any given game. It's only trying to use those in the situations where, like you said earlier, okay, I'm going to do this so that I can set the win up in the next turn or two. Instead of just going, well, I'm just going to kill you first, or, well, I'm going to get rid of all your stuff until I can eventually get rid of you. Because you can't, trust me, I've tried. You can't just Zephyr things over and over again with no actual threat and try and eventually win the game. It doesn't work. It's not good. Those have been some bad decks that I've brewed in the past. But when water, you can do that a little more easily. In fire, you just kill them first. But yeah, tempo. Like, I think tempo is the biggest thing that it's trying to do, which is just in card game jargon, is just basically making plays that are advantageous to you for a particular period of time, and relying on the fact that the game does end at some point for that to just saying, I'm going to beat you before this becomes a problem again. Right.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, like if you go way back to one of our earlier episodes about where we talked a lot about tempo, we mentioned a lot of wind cards in that episode, just because like it's a very tempo-y element. It doesn't have a lot of permanent answers. We've seen a couple couple of Pier and Mercurial Heart,
Mhm.
and the Recollection decks, specifically talking about Stifling Trap, which will deal 2 damage to an ally and negate an on-enter effect. And also Tempest Downfall, which deals 3 damage to a unit, or 6 damage if that unit had been suppressed. Or actually, I think if it just entered that turn.
Yeah.
But I mean, either way, like these are kind of like the first instances of direct damage we've seen in Wind. I suspect they'll be pretty rare. The Tempest Downfall, especially, like that's like I think you'll see that in kind of more mage classes, because I think that's class bonus to mage as well. So you don't see a lot of those permanent answers, like you were mentioning. And it really, this whole kind of discussion, especially talking about tempo, reminds me of when after Ascent Houston, in the Grand Archive Discord, there was a lot of discussion around whether Wind Allies was an aggro deck or a mid range deck. Um, and I would imagine a lot of people were on the side of it's an aggressive deck, because that's pretty much what it was doing. It was presenting a lot of questions that the opponent needed to answer in order to actually win the game. And if they could not take care of your allies and take care of your board, they were just going to lose to this overwhelming, growing force that you were presenting of 2/3s and ace and protectors. But really, like it has a lot of like all of its own answers that it has to questions your opponent is answering are all things like Zephyr, which are just going to temporarily remove a problem card. Like you could play a Zephyr, which would maybe bounce an opponent's Majestic Spirit, allowing you to get in for those final points of damage, right? Or you could play like a Smoke Bombs and do the same thing, giving it stealth instead of suppressing it. Or you can use that same Zephyr to like protect your ally in an ally mirror or what have you. So it had like a little bit of like mid-range play to it, even though it was like trying to just like be aggressive and end the game fairly quickly. It clearly was not aggressive like a fire deck is, where all of its allies just have only offensive utility. Whereas like all these wind allies, all these 2/3s have a lot of defensive utility as well. Like you're like, if you think about the wind ally mirror, right? Like it's not just a race to see who can kill the other one for fastest. Like there's a lot of interplay between both players trying to figure out who can actually end up with control of the board and drain their opponent of resources before they finally finish the game.
That was exactly what I was going to say, which is, if for that whole discussion, for anyone who thought it was an aggro deck, just it's on YouTube. Go back and watch the finals of Ascent Houston, which was the two True Champion Gaming. That was Caben and Isaac.
I think that's
Caben and Isaac. Did I?
I'm pretty sure that's what.
I think it was Caben and Isaac. I think it was Caben and Isaac. I think Terry got knocked out a little before that. I think. I don't remember anyway. Taylor will look it up. But
I'm looking it up right.
Okay.
It was Caben and Isaac.
Okay. Watch the game between Caben and Isaac. And try and tell me that isn't either of those are aggro decks. It's all they're doing. They go on forever. They exhaust their one of the games. They exhaust their material decks just jockeying the entire time, just trying to establish a slight leg up tempo wise on one another. And you could not from the outset figure out who was going to win that game. It was the exact opposite of watching aggro decks play.
Yeah.
And to be fair, in good play, there is always an element of who's the beatdown. In an aggro v aggro matchup, you have to figure out, am I more benefited right now by trying to control what the opponent's doing, or am I going to actually be able to go faster than them? But this didn't have elements of that. It was pure, just like one of us is going to end up with the superior board position and that player is going to win the game. And neither player could decide where they were at until the game was about to end, basically. It was, I mean, to me, that answers the dilemma clearly.
Watch that match and then go find some match of two players playing like Fire Xander aggro into each other, right? It's a completely different situation. The Wind Allies mirror is going to go to turn 25. The Fire Xander mirror is, if it went to turn 5, both players would have had just like the worst hands possible. Like that game is going to turn 3, maybe.
Yeah.
Right. Like It's just two
Maybe.
completely different worlds with two completely different sets of tools, which is why I think a lot of like there was an argument for Wind Allies being considered a mid range deck, and honestly, it makes a lot of sense. The way the format was set up, and probably still is set up, a lot of times, most decks are going to be like if you play against Wind Allies and you've got to ask yourself, am I the beatdown or am I the control? Most decks are still going to say control, just because like one of the best ways to win against Wind Allies is just to grind them out of resources because they don't have
Right.
like a lot of reach.
Yep.
But that doesn't mean like they are in an aggro deck, right? It just means that their tools rely on them maintaining control of the board, and if they lose control of it, their tools are now ineffective.
Yeah, I mean that's honestly I think a really important thing to point out too, which is that we mentioned that wind is really reliant on the board, which is great when they can become the king of the board and it's their domain, they control it, and they're playing things to it, and they're drawing cards and stuff. It also means that the Achilles heel of a lot of wind decks is controlling the board. If the wind deck runs out of a board, it it doesn't operate in the same realm as fire where it can just find some reach and close the game out anyway. Like if fire allies get an attack off and you kill the ally, they just go great. Like I did the damage. That was all that mattered. Now it's in my graveyard. I'm going to banish it for value. Like it's going to be great. Um, Wind allies need to stick around a little more. They need to exist to really make their value back a lot of the time, which is why those wind mirrors are often so about you can't let the opponent get out of control, because then they end up in the situation you were talking about earlier where they have 2/2/3s. So now if you are just playing a single 2/3, it dies every turn. It can't kill a 2/3 on its own, but 2/2/3s kill it back, right? So it is so essential playing wind to be able to make sure you can maintain the board. And I'm just going to throw this out there, that I've seen a lot of people step into Grand Archive for the first time. Maybe you're one of them, listener. Maybe you're listening to this and you're like, you just started. You're trying to get a little bit more info. You're gleaning more resources from whoever you can find on YouTube. So you found a couple of schmucks talking about it on a podcast. I've watched so many people play these starter decks right away, or like, for example, the Slime Recollection deck actually is another good example of this. And they slap allies out against a superior board and then pass turn, and then their allies die. Mm-hmm. And then they end the game ends soon afterwards, and they feel like I couldn't do anything. And this is one of the things that I think is incredible about Grand Archive, but there is a learning curve to getting used to this. But Grand Archive, your early turns, the jockeying for the board position, all that stuff is extremely impactful. And if you get to the point with some decks where your opponent has maintained control of the board, if your deck doesn't have a way out of that in some way, which it like in advanced elements and stuff, it certainly can. You know, it only takes one nice Ghost of Pendragon turn to fix everything right up, right? But the worst thing you can do is let the opponent get control of the board and then play into it directly by putting down things that can't gain any ground back for you. Putting down a 2/2 when they have 2/2/3s, like, yeah, that's it's not enough, because they will just hold control. So just food for thought when you're playing. You know, if you're new to the game, be thinking about, what is the opponent going to do when I put this down, and how good is that for me? Sometimes the right play is to not play the ally and back off and find a different route, you know?
Yeah. And like for wind, that's going to be like waiting for a Zephyr, looking for your Dream Fairy to bounce your opponent's board, give you an opening to play another ally then. And now all of a sudden you've got 3 power worth of allies on the board that you can continue to trade back into.
Yeah.
It's a very like counterintuitive kind of situation to be in, actually, when you lose control of the board, like trying to figure out how to fight back out of that. In wind, especially, like in fire, you've got some hard removal spells. You've got things like fireball that are going to do damage and kill something. In water, you can either like Song of Frost. You also have direct damage spells in like freezing hail. You've got quite a few different tools, but wind is a little bit more limited, or at least you have to be a little bit more creative with what you're doing with your solution.
Well, it kind of comes down to the fact that everything you play is a card out of your hand, right? When you ultimately at some point, your opponent, if you can bounce a couple of their things back, it takes their entire turn sequence just to replay those things. Potentially more, potentially multiple turns to replay that, depending on what else they've done, how far down they've gone. For example, things like Attune with the Winds we talked about earlier, really powerful when you hold board position. But if you attune with the Winds and then everything just gets bounced immediately, your opponent maybe got the 2 allies back or something that they attuned, but they did not get the attune back. So they're now down a card in their potential. This Grand Archive having this system where your hand size dictates the amount of action you have in your turn also, is where tempo plays in Wind can actually add up, and where not it's so important again to just not play into that superior board state, because just putting an ally down and it dying is you might as well have just discarded the card. Just like, my turn, draw, I'll discard, go ahead. Like,
Yeah.
that doesn't get you anywhere. Where, like, honestly, if you're not going to die, it might have been better to just go, I'm just going to pass, because then maybe next turn I have that one extra card I need to do 2 things, take something out, and then, if your next turn is go 2/3 Dream Fairy, send that to memory, then use the 2/3 and the Dream Fairy to kill this thing, you might have just totally turned the game around. Whereas if you just played the 2/3 out, it just died, and you better find another, and you're down a card. It's not as helpful.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So yeah, that's kind of going over a lot of Wind's, like board control tools, and really, like, I think we've hit a lot of the really main identity of Wind at this point. There's kind of one other big, well, there's 2 other things. One's pretty large, I think. One is a little smaller. So I'm gonna talk about the smaller thing first. Is that Wind is pretty much the only basic element as well that deals with Fantasias at the moment. So Fantasia is a card type, which is an object. It just sits on the field, and they have kind of a variety of different effects. Some might be Fantasias with Link. We talked about
Fang,
the
Knight of the Dragon Fang. No, wait, it's something
no
dragon. Fang of Dragon's Breath. I keep
Fang
forgetting
of
it.
Dragon's Breath. Yes, thank you. Which is a pole arm link, right? So you have to link it to a specifically a pole arm weapon. But often you'll see ally link, where you just link it to an ally, and it provides a beneficial effect to whatever it's linked to. Fractals are all Fantasias, which are cards that have the keyword reservable, which let you rest them in order to pay for part of a reserve cost. So there's a bunch of different, like, random effects that are just hanging out in the field, and Wind is pretty much the only basic element at the moment that can even interact with them. It's got a couple cards that just destroy them. I think it's got one that like bounces them, and then nothing else really touches Fantasias. There's, I think, was it
You have,
Dusklight
like,
Communion?
yeah, I was gonna say Dusklight Communion, which
But
is such a specific answer,
yep,
because you then also have to run an Astra card in your material deck as well to be
yeah,
able to banish to get that effect. And there's also a really, really weird, like, timing situation with the Fantasia destruction that we're not going to get into in this podcast.
no. That could be a whole other podcast as well. And probably not a full podcast, but yeah. Anyway, so yeah, wind is pretty much um, the only element currently that is like interacting with Fantasias. Water's got a one card currently that like gets buffed when you have a certain number of Fantasias. But Wind is the only one that's like bouncing them or destroying them or anything like that. So that's a small one. But now the larger part of Wind's identity, and kind of the last part here that I want to touch on, is Wind interacts with materialization the most out of the basic elements. So Fire's got cards that destroy Regalia. Water has cards that like transmute Regalia, like Fracture will turn Regalia into a reservable Fantasia. But that's kind of like the limit of what those 2 elements are doing with the material deck and materializing and Regalia in general. Wind actually like will let you either double up on materializations or stop your opponent from trying to like interact with materialization outside of the materialized phase. So it's kind of a weird little niche that Wind has found itself in here as well. So like the big one here is Beseech the Winds, right? Which is a 3-cost wind action that just lets you materialize a card. Just that's it. You just get to get basically an extra materialized step.
Again, tempo, right?
Mhm.
That's you're trading a card for a portion of a turn that you wouldn't have had otherwise. And
Yep.
yeah, it's shows its head again.
Yeah. And I mean, materialization is such a powerful, like, it's one of the more impactful choices you can make in the game is what you're materializing on each turn. So like doubling up on that effect is extremely powerful. We also have Eternal Magistrate, which is a new ally from Mercurial Heart, which is a 2-cost 1/3 with Imbue 2. And if it was imbued, then your opponent cannot, cards cannot leave your opponent's material deck outside of the materialized phase. So it's basically stopping your opponent from getting those extra materializations or like interacting with their material deck in a weird way. Like you'll see that, the most prominent example at the moment is Ethereal Slime, banishing a card from material deck in order to draw a card, get a buff counter. With Eternal Magistrate out, they can't even do that. They're not even allowed to banish a card.
Cards shouldn't even exist. It's stifling our fun as slime players, and I hate it.
I agree. Ethereal Slime should not exist.
No. That one should exist. That one's good. That one's good and glorious, and has so many keywords.
I do like Ethereal Slime, actually. So that's a neat card. But then you also have Dematerialize as well, which is I think it's another 3-cost action from Fractured Crown that returns Orgalia to your opponent's material deck. So it just undoes their materialization. So a bunch of different ways to kind of like play that tempo game.
That card's better than people think it is.
It's much better than people think it is.
That card is so much. That card might be the most underrated card in Grand Archive.
Yeah, 100%. Especially as we're seeing a lot more people play like material cards that have or regalia that have non-zero memory costs as well.
Those Nico decks, I see you. Mm-hmm. I know what you're doing. I got all this floating memory. What if you got to keep spending it over and over again? Get that shield out of here. Get that sword out of here. I don't want to deal with that. You do it again. It's fine.
Yes, exactly. Mage Maiden Lash, get it out of here. Like now, Nico has the floating memory to replay them, right? But Nico's got to wait a whole turn because Nico doesn't have Beseech the Winds.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, it's a very powerful card right now, and I agree. Like it's a tempo piece that's not being utilized enough at the moment. But I mean, that's really all this is. Like the materialization step might as well just be like, I don't know the best way to describe it. I was going to say like a day or whatever, right? So when you Beseech the Winds, you basically get like another day on top. Like you're like doubling up the amount of time you have in a day, essentially.
Yeah, the Grand Archive is actually like secretly a draw 2 game, which is something that isn't always totally obvious right away. But a lot of card games, it's a lot of card games in the past where just you draw a card and then that's your turn. These days, I'm going to go ahead and say it. I think that's old and old fashioned and less fun. I like games that are draw 2 games. I like Grand Archive because Materialize Phase is usually at worst, when you're playing the worst Divine Relic, for example, it's draw an extra card. And at best, it's doing way more fun stuff, and you get it. But it's either way, you're getting like an extra card that turn to play, an extra thing is happening. Mm-hmm. So it's like getting an extra draw is. If you guys think GCR is that good, then that should sound amazing to you, which is why Beseech the Winds is good.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, Temporal Spectrometer really should be a wind card, I would imagine.
It in my eyes, I don't think I think I have just like when I was really like riding the high of Spectrometer, I played it in some non-wind decks, but then I took it out because like I'd only play it in wind. Yeah. I think it's only a wind. Might as well have wind on it.
I mean, it works okay in water. It's like not as good as in wind, I would say, but it's passable, I would say. Fire just doesn't care to take the turns, right? Like
Fire doesn't have the time. It doesn't bother.
Like why would I play this when I need to materialize 3 other cards right now?
Yeah. So. Fire, you can just go ahead and draw your card or do a Quicksilver Shenanigans. Quicksilver Shenanigans still acceptable. Or Mercurial Heart Shenanigans, but that's...
Yeah, we haven't seen really... Automatons have really only seen a lot of play in like wind so far. We haven't really seen any from fire yet, but I mean, Mercurial Heart would be like a really good fire card, actually. I think.
Yeah,
It's
it would
just like
fit the line.
yeah, just giving you actions right away in return for some actual resource investment, right? So, yeah. Anyway, but yeah, wind is just kind of again like really falling back into this idea of like I'm going to play my game at the speed I need to play it at, or try and make you play it at the speed I need to play it at. And well, actually, I shouldn't say that. I'm going to try and match the speed you're playing at. Maybe is a better way to put it, right? Going to speed myself up if you're going quickly. I'm going to slow myself down if you're playing slowly, and go from there. And in these cards like Beseech the Winds and Dematerialize and Eternal Magistrate really help you kind of enact that plan as well.
Yeah, that's the big thing that I think Eternal Magistrate has had the biggest impact so far, which is just saying I am going to choose the rate at which we level this game. Ideally, I level faster than you.
Yes.
And that's the tempo advantage it's attempting to gain as a premier win card right now.
To me, that it does feel a little bit more like a water effect, where like water kind of if it's a very like prison-y effect, if I can borrow a term from other games, where like you're locking down what your opponent can do, feels very like watery, as opposed to like undoing what they've done already.
I think Eternal Magistrate, if it said cards can't leave players' material decks, I think that would be a water card. I think the fact that it says cards can't leave your opponent's material decks is what makes it a win card. It's what makes it a card that's attempting to gain a tempo advantage, not just a card that's attempting to prolong the game.
Oh, that makes sense. Yeah.
That's how I think about it, at least.
Mm-hmm. No, I buy that for sure. Yeah, I mean that's really like kind of a lot of the big concepts of wind, though. Is there anything else you want to hit here, Dan, as we're starting to kind of wind down?
I just want to mention that this is Taylor's idea for a little mini series, and I thought it was a ton of fun. We've got some good feedback where it sounds like some people have really enjoyed they're getting into the game and have enjoyed this little analysis into how the different elements work. So I would love to hear you guys' feedback on this, and especially if there's any other kind of maybe earlier level or bigger picture concepts you guys want us to dig into in future episodes. We certainly have some. We have some pretty cool ideas. At least I have some I haven't shared with Taylor, which I will soon, about some cool episodes in the future. But we just want to hear what you guys thought. If you did enjoy this, and if you had anything else you want us to dig into, we'd love to. Really appreciate that. Leave it down in the comments down below.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these like more theory focused episodes are a lot more fun because they kind of like just let us like freeform conversation and stuff a little bit more. And kind of just go whatever direction we want with it. Obviously like recap episodes are a lot of fun because it's always fun to kind of like go back over the weekend and talk about how well we did or how well we didn't do, depending on the weekend and the tournament and that kind of stuff. And spoilers are awesome. I love talking about just like specific cards as well. But a lot of these like discussions more about theory kind of really help you. For me anyway, they help me like wrap my head around the game and kind of how I can improve myself as a player and improve my deck building and figure out exactly like kind of how to play the game at an optimal level. Because it's for Granted Archive specifically, it's just like a lot of the systems are, if they're not like novel, I think a lot of them are pretty novel, but if they're not novel, they're done in such a way that like they don't really mesh with as many card games, or they put a significant enough twist on other card games I've played that like you just really have to reevaluate the context in which these mechanics are taking place.
I think it's not obvious how to get the most advantage out of certain things. We've gone through plenty of examples in the past of times when we found players innovating on what we thought was a very simple and clear effect, and they're like, oh, when you play it like that card's actually insane. Great job. And that is I agree totally. I'm someone who often processes my thoughts as I'm talking about things, which shouldn't be too surprising since I started a YouTube channel to talk about things I like. It's helpful for me actually. Just I do my analysis sometimes by talking with other people about it. As it's coming out of my mouth, I'm in the process of analyzing what I said. So hopefully I was on the right track. But I hope that listening to this also, gets your mind grapes rolling around there a little bit.
Did you say your mind grapes?
Mind grapes, yeah. That's actually a dated reference now. That's from 30 Rock. So.
That is for us that shouldn't be that dated, but it is pretty dated actually. Yeah.
It at least dates us.
It does, unfortunately.
As firm millennials.
Yep. Yes. I think we're pretty average age as far as like Grand Archive players go, right? That's what I tell myself anyway. I don't want to be an oldie.
You just keep saying that, Taylor, and let's check in on that again in 10 years, okay?
Well, in 10 years I will actually be old though, because like I'll be like 40, so like there's just no getting around it at that point.
Well, I'll be 40 a little before that, so
yeah. Well, that's unfortunate for you. Anyway, again, thank you listeners for tuning in. We're going to be back in 2 weeks. I'm not sure what we'll talk about yet. It'll be something interesting and something Grand Archive related. And that's really all I can share with you at the moment.
It's going to be the idea I tell Taylor right after we turn off this podcast.
Ooh, I was going to shoot that down, but like if it's actually a good idea, like I would want to talk about it. So I can't just shoot it down right now. But yeah, anyway, so thank you very much, everyone. And, we'll talk to you later.
Bye.